these microphones. Thank you. Thank you, James. So if you just hang on for a few minutes, we'll take any questions, please, if there are any. So.
Thanks for telling us about Poland, because I think what Poland has suffered since joining the EU is indescribable in some ways. It's just so abominable what's happened. And that guy saying, should I hang myself or leave the country? Yeah, it's incredible. But I wanted to ask you about China, because China's going over to that, and there's one or two big US companies involved, aren't there? Is it Freshfield? I can't remember its name. Anyway, China. Thanks.
Yes, so one of the countries one of the countries we're actually looking at filming it is China. But it's the elephant in the room. You can't talk about global pig production and not mention China, because 50% of consumption is in China, and it's growing every day. And actually, one of the most interesting stories with regards to China is that all the Western countries are actually battling to export to China because they're able to pay for pork far higher prices than everywhere else. So you've got the British government signing contracts taking breeding pigs by planes to China, and also selling the parts of the pigs that we don't want to eat in this country. There's recently been a spike in planning applications in Iowa, and everyone was very confused. They didn't understand, because pork consumption is coming down slightly in the US, grain prices are coming up, and they said, well, what's fueling this? And then they realized that all these factory farms are being built to supply the Chinese market. And the Danes have recently, the biggest Danish pork company has recently issued a report saying, there are more pigs in Denmark than there are people. And they said, we need to expand production even further because we want to capture the Chinese market. So what's happening in China itself is a huge issue, but also all these countries exporting to China. So there isn't an easy solution. We've received lots of advice from people saying you have to be very careful because as Western filmmakers, you can't really go in there and say, you guys should be doing this, and you can't really have a campaigning film. So we're looking at how we can say, this is what the West has screwed up, don't repeat their mistakes. But yeah, it's a long road, so if anyone's got any advice on China for us as well, we'd be happy to take it.
Okay, we have another question over here.
You mentioned that a lot of it was driven by sort of internationally or World Bank IMF policies, and I wondered if you're doing any advocacy at that level as well, or if anyone else is.
We want to. With the Ecuador film, the local NGO that we're working with actually put in a complaint to the World Bank saying, you guys funded this, you're polluting the local waterways, all the local people are up in arms against it. So they sent their auditors, and they had a look and they said, no, everything's fine. So yeah, we do try and engage with those institutions as much as possible, but so far we haven't had much luck, and hopefully we will be able to show some of the new films that focus specifically on projects that the IMF and World Bank obviously funded or co-own. But I say we, it's literally me, Tracy, and the filmmaker in the office most days. So we're a small team, we do what we can. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I can see two more questions, one from Chris and then over to Julie.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the European Union and subsidies and that kind of thing. I've always been very uneasy about the European Union. I have to say, I know some people like it, others don't. My main reason has been on the basis of how democracy works or how it doesn't work, put it that way. But there is also the fact, I think cooperation within Europe for good reasons is fine. And the reality is that when you get a mega machine which gets a little bit out of control, that's pretty important. And obviously the other aspect of this, which actually was a question I was going to put to Peter, or I'll mention, and that is the business of where the decision-making bodies get their information. This is the most fundamental issue of all, because you can only make good decisions if you have the soundest possible information. Of course, that's what you were talking about, Peter, it's what you're talking about, it's what everybody this morning has been talking about, in fact, and we'll always talk about. So that is a massive challenge, the business of information sourcing, and actually getting a really sound information source, which isn't lobbied, spiked, perverted by some interest outside itself, or it may be, and with the soundest and best possible intellects and access to information. So that's fundamental. And then there's the issue of the potential distorting effect of things like subsidies and that kind of thing, which I think must be very real and huge. So those deserve a big attack.
Thank you. And would you like to come back on that one?
Yeah, no, in terms of subsidies, absolutely agreed. In terms of the European Union, it's quite funny because a lot of people that work in this field, especially in terms of animal welfare, say actually on an EU level, they're the ones that are pushing better regulations. So you've got the EU Animal Welfare Directive, which says that pigs can't be routinely tail-docked, that they need access to straw, and essentially that would mean that 90% of factory farms across Europe wouldn't be able to operate the way they do. The reason that they dock their tails is that pigs get bored and frustrated and bite each other. And Compassion on Farming did a report and they found 70 to 100% of farms they visited were completely ignoring regulations. And there's a new sow stall ban that's coming into effect in January that's widely predicted to just be ignored. So in terms of the EU, a lot of the problems aren't to do necessarily with just the bad legislation, but to do with just complete lack of enforcement. And I think that, yes, it's a problem because it's an EU-wide level thing, so there's less accountability. But at the same time, I think national governments do also use it as a sort of easy way out. They say, oh, it's the EU's fault. In terms of EU subsidies, it doesn't directly relate to pig farming because pig farmers don't get direct subsidies from the CAP. But in terms of things like anaerobic digesters and in terms of feed, that's where they benefit. So yeah, Common Agricultural Policy is currently up for, well, it's being renewed and changed, and there's a whole load of people across, there was a Good Food March a few months ago, and food sovereignty people and food sub-CAP are working hard to make changes. But there's so many lobbyists in Brussels that are working for the big guys that we're up against a huge battle. So I'm quite sceptical as to what we can actually achieve in terms of changing the Common Agricultural Policy. I don't remember what the other question is.
Okay, we have one last question this round from Julie over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you what conditions do you think promote better pig farming and better farming? My parents live in France, and my kind of perception is that there's lots of really local farms down there, and it's quite easy there to buy local produce in a way that it doesn't seem to be in England. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's just my kind of perception. So yeah, I mean, just some reflections on how we can make a big, what can we do to kind of make it better, something that supports better farming and resist this as well?
Yeah, so in terms of what we can do as consumers, definitely buy as local as possible and buy from your local farmer. The problem is, I think the UK has the lowest rated farmers in the whole world, it's like 0.7%. But there are CSA schemes starting up all the time. There's one called the Armchair Farmer, which is specifically to do with pigs, which I quite like the name of. That's just about to be launched. And farmers markets in London and things like that. So definitely try and buy local, try and buy outdoor, organic ideally. There's a whole other issue with labelling. In the UK we're actually quite good on labelling. The rest of the EU it's impossible to know how the pork was produced. So there's acting as a consumer, but also that's not enough. You need to challenge the subsidies, you need to also on the ground challenge specific factory farms. So if you know of anywhere that factory farm is local to you that's being proposed, do challenge it. It's a long, hard road, but that's the key fight that you can actually win, is challenging these on a one-to-one basis. That's how you start.
Okay, we'll have to stop there. Dominika, thank you very much. Just before we go off, so we're going to break for lunch. We hope you can all stay around. If anybody does have to